You think cruelty is loud screaming, blood, steel, but the worst cruelty is quiet. Imagine a boy summoned to the emperor's chambers. The air was thick with incense and rot. A dead woman's name slips from the emperor's lips over and over until the boy realizes he isn't being loved. He's being turned into someone who's already in the grave. Rome remembers Nero for tyranny, decadence, and fire. But his darkest act didn't burn cities, it hollowed out a human soul. It began with the death of the woman he loved, a loss so unbearable that Nero decided death wasn't the end. If you had the power to rewrite flesh itself, history isn't dead, it's just buried beneath silence. Like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're ready to keep digging with us. But be warned, some truths bite back. The death that changed Rome. Poppaea Sabina was not a woman you stumbled into loving. She was the kind of beauty that rewrote the air when she entered a room. Soft voice, sharp eyes, and a smile that could crown or destroy you. She had climbed to the title of empress, not by accident, but by calculated betrayal and charm sharpened to a weapon. And Nero loved her with a fever that bordered on worship. In public she was his ornament. In private she was his obsession. Every glance, every word, every move was his to watch and possess. Then, in 65 AD, that obsession collapsed into tragedy. The stories of her death do not agree. Some say an illness crept in and stole her quietly. Others, the ones whispered in shadow, say Nero, in a blinding rage, kicked her. She was pregnant. The blow shattered more than bone. It ended her life and the life inside her. The effect was immediate and irreversible. The palace, once a place of music, laughter, and the intoxicating scent of her oils, turned cold. Marble floors that had echoed with her footsteps now carried only silence. Nero ordered her body embalmed, not burned, spitting in the face of Rome's sacred cremation rites. He wanted her beauty eternal, untouched by fire. He began to talk to her as if she still walked beside him. Courtiers passed him in dim corridors, lips moving in conversation to empty air. Servants were ordered to refill her perfumes weekly so the palace would never lose her scent. This wasn't grief as Rome had seen it. This was possession, a refusal to let death have the last word. And the longer it went on, the deeper it sank into something far more sinister. Because Nero was not simply mourning, he was plotting. If Poppaea could not live again, then her face, her form, and her presence could be carved into someone else. The empire's most feared man had decided he would replace her, not in spirit, not in memory, but in flesh. And somewhere in the far reaches of his realm there was a boy whose beauty would become his doom. When Nero's gaze finally fell on him, the boy had no idea his body would be broken to make room for a ghost. The boy from Asia Minor, his name was Sporus. He was too young to know that beauty could be a death sentence in Rome. Born in Asia Minor, he was a page in service to the empire, known for his almost unreal delicacy of features. Pale skin, dark eyes, a face so symmetrical it felt carved rather than born. It was this face, the cruel accident of his own existence, that drew Nero's attention. The summons came without explanation. One day Sporus was among servants, running errands through marble halls. The next he was escorted into the imperial chambers. The air there was heavy with incense, the kind that clung to the throat. Nero studied him in silence, eyes lingering not as a man's might linger on another human, but as an artist stares at raw stone, measuring, calculating, already imagining what he could make it into. What Sporus didn't know was that he had been chosen, not as a page, not as a lover, but as a vessel. Days later, the order came. The boy was taken away from public sight. The streets whispered about the favored page who had vanished into the emperor's private wing. And behind those guarded doors, the truth was made clear. Nero did not want Sporus as he was. He wanted Poppaea back. And if the gods had denied him resurrection, he would force it with his own hands. The castration was not ceremonial, it was an act of cold engineering. No choice, no mercy. Sporus's screams, they say, carried down the corridors, muffled only by the stone. The marble drank them in. When it was over, he was stitched into a future he never chose. When Sporus woke, he was no longer Sporus in the eyes of Rome. Nero dressed him in Poppaea's silks, perfumed him with her oils, fastened her jewels around his neck. The resemblance was uncanny now, not just in face but in presence. And then came the wedding. It was no private perversion. It was public. Senators and nobles attended. The boy stood veiled in white, trembling beneath gold-threaded fabric, while Nero lifted the veil and kissed him as though sealing a holy union. In the eyes of the emperor, this was not theater, it was the return of the woman he loved. The crowd applauded because they had to. But in the shadows of the colonnade, there were eyes that looked away, unable to watch. To Nero, this was victory over death. To Sporus, it was the erasure of his name, his body, and his life. And yet, the emperor's most grotesque desire was still to come, because Nero didn't just want Poppaea back. He wanted Rome to believe she had never left. A living ghost in the palace from the moment the vows were spoken, Sporus ceased to exist. The name itself was erased in court. The servants were instructed to address him only as Augusta, the title once belonging to Poppaea Sabina. To speak his boyhood name was to invite punishment. Life in the palace became a carefully staged haunting. Every morning attendants bathed him in Poppaea's signature oils, dressing him in her gowns and arranging his hair in the exact style she had worn. His meals mirrored hers. His daily walks traced her old routes through the gardens, past fountains she had once admired. This was no mere charade, for Nero's private grief was a full resurrection in the emperor's mind. He spoke to Sporus as though he truly were Poppaea, recalling shared memories the boy had never lived. At public banquets, Nero sat him beside him, feeding him morsels of food and calling him by pet names only Poppaea had known. The court played along. Senators bowed. Diplomats addressed him as empress. Those who hesitated quickly learned that disbelief was a dangerous expression in Nero's Rome. For the palace walls became a labyrinth without exits. Every day was a performance in a role he never wanted. His own identity swallowed whole by the ghost he was forced to embody. Even the way he moved, how he placed his hands, how he tilted his head was corrected if it strayed from the empress's manner. At night, when the palace finally went quiet, the truth was worse. Nero would come to him, expecting not just the appearance of Poppaea, but her intimacy. To refuse was unthinkable. To comply was to dissolve a little more each time, until Sporus no longer knew where the boy ended and the ghost began. Rumors spread through Rome about the resurrected Poppaea. Some believed it, others whispered in disbelief, sharing quiet jokes about their emperor's madness. But no one dared to mock him openly. Exile or execution would be the price. There was an unspoken irony in all of it. Nero, who commanded armies and crushed rebellions, could not conquer the one truth every mortal must face. He had power over life and death in every way except the one that mattered, and so he twisted the living into a grotesque imitation of the dead. But even as Sporus lived this nightmare, forces outside the palace were stirring. The empire was restless. The emperor's power was beginning to fracture, and when Nero's world finally began to burn, he would drag his living ghost with him, determined to keep her until the very last breath. The end of an emperor. By 68 AD, the empire's patience with Nero was gone. The man who once commanded awe now inspired only hatred. Rebellion flared like brushfires from Gaul to Hispania, led by generals who had once sworn loyalty. The Senate, long humiliated by his excesses, began to whisper openly of his removal. Even the Praetorian Guard, his personal protectors, could no longer be trusted. And yet, through the collapse, Sporus remained at his side, still dressed as Poppaea, still spoken to as if she lived. The emperor clung to him like a talisman, as though the boy's borrowed face could shield him from the crumbling reality outside the palace gates. When word came that the Senate had declared him a public enemy, a sentence that meant capture, humiliation, and death, Nero's bravado cracked. He fled the city with only a handful of attendants. Sporus went with him, draped in imperial finery, riding in silence beside a man who now looked less like an emperor and more like a hunted animal. They reached a villa outside Rome, the last place Nero would ever see. The emperor raged, wept, and then tried to steel himself for the act he knew was coming. He told Sporus, "If I die, you must die too." It wasn't a request. It was a command, spoken in the same tone he might use to order a meal. Outside the villa, the hoofbeats grew louder. Soldiers closed in. Nero paced, trembling not from courage, but from the absence of it. He lifted a dagger, pressed it to his throat, and froze. The man who had watched cities burn could not face the smallest fire, the one that ends a life. In the end, it was his secretary who finished it. The blade drove deep, and the emperor fell. His last words, "What an artist dies in me," were a monument to his vanity. A man who could only see himself as a performance, even in death. For Sporus, the moment should have been release. The man who had stolen his name, his body, and his future was gone. The air should have felt lighter, but freedom in Rome was a fragile illusion, and Sporus was not seen as a person to be freed. He was an object, a relic of the imperial bedchamber, a prize. And there were powerful men eager to claim him. One of them would force Sporus to relive his nightmare, but this time, the stage would be far bloodier, and there would be no escape except the one he chose for himself, the final humiliation in the chaos after Nero's death. Rome became a game board where emperors rose and fell in months, and Sporus is still young. Still wearing the face of a dead empress, was passed from one player to the next like a piece too valuable to discard. First came Otho, a man who had once been married to Poppaea before Nero stole her. To him, Sporus was more than a curiosity. He was living revenge, a way to parade the memory of his stolen wife through the streets, to make Rome remember. Sporus was dressed, adorned, and displayed once more. Though perhaps with less brutality than Nero had shown, it was still a cage. Then came Vitellius, a general with none of Nero's obsession but all of his cruelty. He had no illusions of love or grief. To him, Sporus was a spectacle, an instrument for public entertainment. Vitellius devised a show that would stain final days in the great arena, before the eyes of Rome. He planned a mock wedding. Sporus would be married to a towering gladiator dressed as Pluto, the god of the underworld. The ceremony would end with the gladiator raping him, symbolically dragging the bride into the land of the dead. Like the myth of Persephone, it was theater meant to humiliate, to strip away any last shred of dignity. The crowd would laugh, cheer, and drink as it happened. But Sporus had lived enough stages, enough veils, enough hands forcing him into roles carved from other people's desires. He had been remade, renamed, and reduced to a shadow for too long. This time, he would not let the curtain rise. Before the day of the spectacle, he took his own life. No dramatic gesture, no final words, just the quiet refusal to be used again. In the end, Sporus' story did not echo through Rome the way Nero's fire did. Historians recorded him in the margins, a strange footnote in the reign of a mad emperor, but his life tells a truth Rome preferred to forget, that power will twist love into possession, and possession into cruelty, until nothing human remains on either side. Nero had sought to conquer death by remaking the living. Vitellius had sought to conquer shame by turning it into sport. Both had failed, but only after destroying the same boy in different ways. And somewhere, in the silence between Rome's great spectacles, the ghost of Sporus still walks, neither the boy he was nor the woman he was forced to become, but something in between, a reminder of what it costs to survive an emperor's love. If this story left a mark, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe for more disturbing tales, forgotten deaths, and the grotesque truths history tried to bury, because the past doesn't sleep, and neither should we.